Welcome to the May 10th Council work session, and our first order of business is Railroad Quiet Zone Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Vinnis and members of the council. So you've got the PowerPoint presentation at your places, and also I'll be going off the screen. So this is our Railroad Quiet Zone and Safety Improvement Project. And back in March of 2015, the council gave us direction about pursuing a railroad quiet zone. And at that time, the focus was citywide, but we came with the understanding that staff would come back with a memo, which we did, recommending that the first phase of it be the 10 crossings between, let's see, this one here is 8th and Hilliard all the way over to Van Buren. And so those, part of the reason for that is it's dealing with one railroad at a time. This line is owned by Union Pacific and it also runs the Amtrak trains. And these 10 crossings represent 70% of the routine train horns within the city. So it's the most active line with 19 to 23 trains per day, both Union Pacific and Amtrak. And one of the things that we've learned through this process, and I'll show you because I've got this map up, is the distance between this crossing on Lincoln Street and the crossing on Pearl Street is great enough that you could actually have two distinct quiet zones through this area. We're not proposing that, but it plays into the funding discussion and the phasing of it. So although it's one phase, there's enough separation between Lincoln and Pearl to meet the federal criteria for separation for quiet zone spacing. And then as part of this, we were trying to coordinate three distinct railroad projects: the quiet zone, those crossings between 8th and Hilliard and Van Buren, the Willamette to Willamette project, which is trying to connect downtown Willamette Street to the Ewed property and the Willamette River, and that was focused on a better connection through the 8th and Hilliard rail crossing, and then the Amtrak improvements to Amtrak, which includes a stub track or a siding for laying over the Amtrak trains overnight near the station, and then improvements to the platform as well. And that project by itself would require the closing of Lincoln Street. So the coordination was the closing of Lincoln Street required as part of the Amtrak project. The relocation of Hilliard is considered a new crossing by the railroad, and they would require a separate closure, which could be the Lincoln Street. So that was the connection between those three projects. We've since come up with a design that uses the existing 8th and Hilliard crossings. So the quiet zone in and of itself doesn't require any closings of crossings. However, at some point in the future, when that Amtrak station improvement project goes forward, that would require the closure of Lincoln. Developing a quiet zone is a federal process, and it's prescribed in federal regulations. And one of the things prescribed in the regulations are the type of safety measures that can be used to replace train horns. And those include quad gates, which are, all of the crossings have two gates, one for each direction of traffic. And a quad gate simply adds two more gates. And most of these safety improvements are to prevent people from doing illegal movements in traffic. So the existing gates prevent, if you're obeying the law, it prevents you from crossing the tracks, but you can still drive around it. So adding two gates prevents that. Closure of a crossing is also a safety measure. Conversion of a street from one-way to two-way with the gates is a measure. And then medians, which have some restrictions based upon their proximity to driveways and intersections. And then another of the requirements is the formation of a diagnostic team. And this includes, and it stipulates who has to participate in that. It includes the railroad as the owner, Union Pacific as the owner, or ODOT Rail, which is the state regulatory authority and issues crossing orders for all rail crossings. the Federal Rail Administration, which permits or approves the quiet zone, and then the city as the road authority, and also as the entity that pays for all of the capital costs and the operation and maintenance of any new infrastructure associated with a quiet zone. And so the diagnostic review team met in the summer of 2015 in the field to go through each of the crossings to determine which of the safety measures would be viable at those crossings. And we did this intentionally before we convened our citizen panel. And so these are the members of our citizen panel. We had 11 members, and it's not just the members I want to show, but what they were representing. So we had members representing neighborhood associations, folks that are close to the quiet zone, folks that are far away from the quiet zone but are still disturbed by train horns, people with disabilities, the Chamber of Commerce, people that use bikes or walking or transit for their as a way to get around. So we tried to get a diverse group, and that was kind of part of as I'll talk about later, the triple bottom line analysis. I mean, a quiet zone can be a very technical analysis to come up with a solution, but by bringing in this diverse group of people with a lot of different interests, we were able to flesh out issues that beyond just the technical aspects of the quiet zone. So this group met 6 times. They were part of our public process, but they also actively participated in our public process. And the charge of the panel was to recommend a set of safety measures and also to recommend a funding strategy. For public outreach, we used some of the traditional methods such as our website and media contacts and written and online surveys, community meetings, and an open house. But in addition, members of our citizen panel also hosted meetings. So like for the 2 neighborhood associations, Whitaker and downtown, Yapoa Terrace, we did a presentation there. The American Council of the Blind, we did a presentation to that interest group. And then they also participated in our open house. So this, as I put this presentation together and looked at it, I realized this is Ron Saylor, who's on our panel. This is Bill Randall, also on our panel, and this is Sam Hahn. So they actively engaged in not only the panel itself, the meetings that we held, but when we had events, they were there participating and trying to get input from their fellow citizens. So they did an outstanding job in that respect. So the idea of this process was we worked with them to develop a recommendation on the safety measures and the funding strategy, and then we had a more focused outreach, such as this open house and then some of the community meetings, and they received input and we received input directly, and then we came back together and that changed some of the recommendations. So at that time we were looking at closing either Lincoln or Lawrence, so they got feedback on those 2 closures. There was an issue around loss of parking in Van Buren because parking is such a critical issue in the Whitaker, so they got feedback on that. They got feedback from the different businesses about how freight gets to their businesses. And they also got input on pedestrian crossings. So it'll talk about it in the recommendation a little bit more, but the Council of Blind, they wanted pedestrian gates at all of the crossings that have transit service, including Washington and Pearl. So that was part of the input we got through the public process. So the safety measures that the group landed on were the quad gates at Monroe, Madison, Washington, Pearl, and High, medians at Van Buren, Lincoln, and Lawrence, a one-way street with gates at Jefferson, medians and a roundabout at Hilliard, and then pedestrian gates at at High, and then 8th and Hilliard, and then additional fencing. One of the issues with a quiet zone is that it only eliminates routine train horns. So if someone is trespassing on the tracks or walking along the tracks, the train engineer is going to blow his horn as a warning. So folks felt it was necessary to close the gaps in the fencing along the rail corridor through those 10 crossings to try to mitigate trespass. So I'll show some of the examples of the different measures from different places around the country. So this shows the quad gates. So you can see, I mean, the standard gate would be this one, and then we're adding 2 more. So you have a total of 4 gates. And actually, this is a little pedestrian gate you can see here. And this is an example of a median, so it prevents, they have to be long enough so that it prevents people from, that they've proceeded far enough to the point where they've realized, well, if I was going to try to run that gate or go around that gate, I'm trapped by the median. And then this is a one-way street with just gates in the one direction. And probably our most complicated crossing was 8th and Hilliard. So this utilizes the existing crossing. Whoops. So this is the EWEB property. This is their substation here. This is Hilliard. The courthouse would be over here, the federal courthouse. So you'd come through, there'd be medians along the road, and then you'd enter a roundabout. And this gets you access to the EWEB property up this way, or access to the U of O property in that direction. Then again, this is another example of pedestrian gate. So the main gate is here, and then the pedestrian gate is off to the side. And then this is an example of fencing. So this is existing fencing. You can see this is the EWEB property back here, and this is Hilliard Street. So this is just the type of fencing that would be used to close the gaps in the fencing along the tracks. On the funding strategy, we went through, and it's one of the attachments to the final report. I got ahead of myself here. So Appendix E to the final report is a memorandum that the staff put together to the panel to talk about different funding options. And what they landed on was a combination of urban renewal funds for the 3 crossings on the east end, and then a general obligation bond for the 7 crossings on the west end. And on the general obligation bond, as you know, we're working with our street repair review panel to develop a bond for street repair that would be on the November ballot. And as part of that, we're going to do polling, and we'll poll questions about the quiet zone of the viability of including the quiet zone in that funding package as we go forward. And then I'll catch up with that later. So on the urban renewal district, the 8th and Hilliard crossing is within the urban renewal district. The Pearl and High Street crossings are not. So it would require a minor amendment to the district to add this area in purple. So this is the boundary now, the western boundary of the riverfront urban renewal district. So it would require adding this purple area to include those 2 crossings to be eligible for funding. So that the riverfront urban renewal district is 243 acres, and that area in purple is about 3/4 of an acre. And then this shows it a little bit larger scale. So this area in purple is the expansion, and then this area in yellow is the existing district, and it continues to the east. So in attachment B to your agenda item summary shows a schematic of the entire riverfront urban renewal district. I'm just showing a little piece of it here. So part of your motion today, if we proceeded with this funding strategy on the riverfront urban renewal district, would be to hold a meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency Board to review that amendment. And then that board would, in a work session on the minor amendment, would approve going forward with that expansion, and then also approve the process for appointing a advisory committee. And then that advisory committee would look at the recommendation on the Myron Amendment and come back to the agency board for a final recommendation. And then on the triple bottom line, I mentioned this a little bit. So we used the city's triple bottom line tool, and it's the whole analysis is documented in Appendix F to the final report. But I'll just touch on some of the highlights. So again, our part of our incorporating or using a citizen panel was to have that aspect or that viewpoint of the triple bottom line as we developed the funding strategy and the recommended safety measures. When we talked about the triple bottom line, we talked about the safety, not just for motor vehicles, but for pedestrians and cyclists as well, and also people with disabilities, because when you're going for people that are sight impaired, the train horn is a very important safety measure of when crossing a rail line. And so it's how to deal with that, because there are noises associated with just the pedestrian gates or the crossing gates at rail crossings now. So that was part of that discussion. And then the noise and other environmental impacts. So a lot of people view the train horns as very unhealthy and objectionable noise. But there's also a faction of the community that, if you're farther from the tracks, it's a soothing, or people reminisce about Eugene and the railroads from years past. So the community's mixed on. I think the majority find train horns deleterious, but there's a faction that also enjoys that noise if you're farther from the tracks. And then on the funding options, we talked about in that attachment to the report about different funding options, but a lot of the funding options would require us to take money from other programs. So if we were going to fund the quiet zone with general fund capital, it would take funding away from the capital projects that Parks and Facilities does for their facilities. And then one of the larger issues in the Whitaker in that discussion was the impact on property values. So from the research we were able to find, and I think intuitively, with the implementation of a quiet zone, property values are going to go up, and the concern was that would also drive up rents and change the character of the Whitaker. And then finally, we heard some comments from the folks on the other three crossings on the UP line, the Union Pacific line, Irvington, Irving, and Aubrey, which are all within the city's urban growth boundary, but currently in unincorporated Lane County and under the jurisdiction of the county. So there's interest from those folks of expanding the quiet zone. So I think that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mayor, could I get in the queue?
Absolutely. So I have Mike first, then Betty.
Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work, sir, and the report. I have to say, I didn't read that part of the report that goes through the details of the financing, and that's what I want to drill down on first a little bit. Other than the GEO bond and the expansion of the URD, or the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, and general obligation, general fund capital, what were the other methods that were discussed for finance?
Well, we talked about, so we put together three straw proposals for the, we in that memo we outlined all of the different options or funding sources, and then put together three straw proposals. So you didn't want to hear about general fund capital. That would take money from Parks and Facilities.
What other ways to fund this are there?
Well, out of road fund, we could, so part of it, the road fund is restricted to the public right of way. So like the medians, we'd take, you can take money out of the road fund and fund the medians. Mm-hmm. A lot of that area, or or most of it is within block grant eligible neighborhoods. So you could use community development block grant funding for some of it, but that's a program that's
Yeah.
already over constrained.
Let me get to the real question of mine. Was some manner of quasi-LID discussed, or is that somehow prohibited as a possibility?
No, that was one of, I'm glad you brought that up. That was one of the funding options, and that's possible. It's be a little tricky to figure out the boundary of that district, but it's certainly.
And wouldn't the railroad at least share in some of that?
No, the railroad wouldn't share any of it. They're not a.
One of the chief pieces for me, you illustrated in a lot of the discussion about what the nearby neighbors want. Mm-hmm. They wanted the quiet, which makes a lot of sense. They're the ones who've spoken mostly about it. They're the ones, in my opinion, the very nearby neighbors who will get the greatest benefit from a quiet zone, as opposed to people who live much farther away. And considering that there are a number of people in the farther western part of the community that would would really like to have their crossings quieted too. It seems to me like the chief benefit is largely derived by the nearby neighbors, and they should justly share in the greatest burden of the cost of doing it, rather than the community as a whole. That's what seems just to me. And so I'm not sure I can support this particular motion of going this way and supporting the GO bond, while there are a couple of other options. There is also the option of the Comcast monies, and so I'm perfectly happy with the recommendations of the committee's work about how we proceed, but the manner in which we finance gives me some challenge that we should have greater discussion about that. So I may offer an amendment, I suppose, after making the motion. Then the other piece is, remind me again why we don't just include all of the western intersections as well in River Road and Santa Clara?
Well, because they're under the county jurisdiction, for one, and and there's enough separation and distance that we captured. And it's unincorporated. Well, they're in unincorporated Lane County, even though the noise affects residents of the city. And it was to start with a manageable piece.
I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but we as a city floated a legal option, did we not, that the railroad might be used as a cherry stem kind of capacity for annexation discussions. I don't want to go too far down this road, but how is it that we don't have the ability to deal with those intersections as a city, but we use them in conversations around annexation? I'm not sure my question is very clear.
I do know your question.
I know. I thought you might. That's what I was hoping for. What's that?
It was a relationship to PacTech and their interest in expanding. Right. We're going to have to get back to you on that. I don't think the right people are around the table to answer that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay. Betty?
You were first.
Cat-like reflexes of mine, Betty.
First, I have a simple question. You identified some of these people on the committee as West End and East End. Does that mean West End of the railroad crossings?
Right.
Oh, okay. So they're mostly all neighbors. Right.
There's some, we did have some residents at large.
Yeah, but it's mostly people by the railroad track. It's easy to spend urban renewal funds, which is one of my big objections to urban renewal. There's no vote required of anybody. You can just spend it. And I can see why that was suggested, because it's easy, but I don't approve. At least not this. And I hope we're not voting on anything today.
We are.
We don't have to.
Well, we have one. What I understand is what we're voting on today is to approve these safety measures at these intersections.
Well, Yeah, it's to accept the recommendations of the citizen panel. So on
Right.
on the safety measures, we still have to work through the process with the state and the federal government and the railroad. On the bond measure, if that funding option, what I mentioned is, I mean, we're going in parallel with this street repair review panel work, and we're going to do polling to see what's supportable of the community. So even if you, so I don't view you as making a decision as a funding source. I think that'll happen down the road after we get a sense from the community if there's support for it.
It says, and the funding strategy right here in the motion.
So,
But it's really accepting the recommendation. But we still have to work out the mechanics or the details of if that's viable.
I'll
and,
fix
and
that.
so we can, you're right, we can adjust that
I'll
motion.
fix that when we
Right.
get there.
Okay, I'm sure that if you combine this, put this in the street bond, it will fail. Not everybody even wants a quiet zone, and the street, it would be really foolish to fool around with a street bond. We've been very successful and people are extremely pleased with that. But you start combining something else. It's happened with other things too. We didn't get the new fire station until we separated it a long time ago. You combine a few things and people don't want part of them, they'll vote against the whole thing and then they're upset. And I think regardless of your polling, I don't know whom you would poll, but I have been pretty good at predicting vote results over many years, and I can almost guarantee you it will fail if you put that in, if you put a quiet zone in with the streets. And I don't think we should take any chances with that, since that is obviously needed and obviously approved of. Whereas a quiet zone, not everyone thinks we need it. I don't know that we need it, actually. And I keep agreeing with Mike every now and then, but I agree that the people who really will profit by this, maybe there should be some way that they would help pay for it. I don't know if that's what Mike meant or not, but LIDs, we make poor people pay for their streets when we improve the streets. And so anyway, I'm not ready to vote on that at all. I do think that there are people, you said that there are people who enjoy hearing the train whistle. It doesn't just remind them of their youth, it reminds them of going places and romance, fun, and bedtime sometimes. But I think it's far from everyone who wants this. And if you do it, what you're doing it for is the people who are more prosperous and not for the ones who are less prosperous, who may want it too. Anyway, I have big reservations about it. Oh, my other question is, why a roundabout? I didn't understand that. At Hilliard and Franklin, was that it?
Well, it's to have enough distance from the tracks to the intersecting street that would give you access to both the eWeb property to the northwest and the university property.
I heard you say that, but how does a roundabout do that better than?
Because if you just did a T intersection, it would be too close to the railroad tracks. If you came across the tracks and immediately turned left.
So if you make people go around in a circle, they'll have more time.
Well, you'll be away from the tracks, so there'll be less opportunity for the congestion to occur right at that intersection, and someone to get trapped between the crossing on the tracks itself when a train comes through.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people who hate roundabouts too, much more than quiet zones, than train whistles.
Do you want a second round, Betty?
I guess I used that whole 3 minutes, didn't I? Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris?
Did I hear you in your presentation say that there's a sufficient distance between Pearl Street and Lincoln Street that if you were to do the first three, you could get a quiet zone within those three, even if you didn't do the other 7?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. So in my mind, that says, theoretically, you might take what we're talking about today and break it into 2 parts. to chunks, if you will. Is there any sort of a legal, legislative, practical reason why you couldn't approach this as two projects instead of one?
Well, as part of our triple bottom line analysis, one of the issues that came up is in that type of discussion was the folks in the Whitaker feeling, well, you've got the urban renewal fund, you'll get the 3 done on the east end, and nothing will ever happen on the west end. So I think that was why we didn't come forward and recommend let's split this now and go to 2 distinct quiet zones. But I think it does play into the funding is that we could move, because it's a long process working with the railroad. I think if we kept the momentum we have now and move forward on the east end while we're sorting out how to fund the west end, we're not going to lose as much time as if we waited to sort it all out at one time.
Well, I think you're kind of raising where I was going is the financing scheme for both parts is different. The geography is sufficiently different that you can get a quiet zone in one without having to do anything in the other. And then also the level of interest or desire, I think, is also somewhat different. I'm hearing that the Whitaker neighborhood still has a lot of questions and is concerned about whether or not this is what they want to do. Whereas the first 3 intersections, which could have a significant impact on the ability to develop the riverfront property and that whole area, I would be interested in seeing that proceed. Because I think we want to develop that property. I think this benefits that property. It could create at least a portion of a quiet zone for the Pearl High and Hilliard Street area, which I think could be very beneficial. The financing mechanism uses urban renewal money once the Urban Renewal Agency decides to add that segment. I think as a discrete project, it has the financing much more secure. Geographically, it's self-contained. It could be its own quiet zone. It accomplishes a number of benefits, particularly around the riverfront property development. And I don't think it has the same level of, I won't call it resistance, but kind of the same level of concern and a desire for more discussion and consideration that the other 7 intersections might have. So I would be interested in at least exploring the possibility. I mean, if we wanted to go ahead and say the safety measures you're proposing for all of these look okay to me. They do look okay to me. In terms of the funding mechanisms and the what next portion, I would be real interested in at least hearing consideration of looking at this as we could do the east 3 intersections with its own discrete funding mechanism and its own timeline and achieve its own quiet zone without having to get into a long protracted discussion. I think that's kind of what you were implying to. You didn't want to do it earlier because you thought it might work well as a self-contained project. I'm saying as a self-contained project, it could slow the entire thing down when it doesn't need to.
Okay. Claire?
Thank you, Mayor. I might need 2 rounds. So as the one city councilor who lives a block and a half from the train tracks, I have a very different perspective from what I've been hearing around the table so far. First of all, I really appreciate the work of the review panel. I think it was excellent work. I think they worked very hard, worked through some very difficult challenges, and I take issue with the statement from Councilor Taylor that it's all people who live near the tracks. Some of them live miles away and say they're impacted by the noise. And some of them, I think, might live in your ward. I'm glad to see the robust participation of businesses along the rail line, since their properties could be greatly impacted by the solutions that were looked at for the crossing. So their participation was very important. Assuming we're going along with the recommendation, which is what I hope we do, though maybe a majority is not ready for that yet. I think we should add the pedestrian safety crossing to the Pearl Street crossing that was not accepted by or recommended by the review panel. The cost of that was about $200,000. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. So, and if we were to extend the Riverfront Urban Renewal District to that crossing, then it would be paid for by those funds and not come out of some other funding source. So I think the pedestrian safety there, that Pearl Street crossing is quite well used, would be an added benefit and serve our Vision Zero goals as well. I also really appreciate the recommendation to add fencing along the gaps. I think that's a significant recommendation that really improves the safety of this proposed quiet zone, and I don't think that might have been identified without the citizen review panel. I do receive emails from folks who live near the county crossings, and so I do think there's some discussion to be had about how we move forward with the county on those. Just a little aside, if the Lincoln crossing is closed for that Amtrak restructuring, who would pay for that?
That would be probably ODOT Rail and maybe Federal Rail Administration.
Okay, so that wouldn't fall on us to be responsible for that.
That's correct.
Okay. So, Mary, you'll have to let me know when I run out of time.
You have 30 seconds.
All right. So I cannot support just building the zone part that's in the riverfront urban renewal without a real commitment to doing the whole zone. That would benefit property owners, the UWeb property and the Fifth Street Market property, without benefiting the residents along the tracks. And I think it would be a betrayal, in my view, of those who have asked for this noise pollution to be eliminated. And I have more to say, so I'll ask for a second round.
Okay, great. Emily.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to say. It's mostly been covered. I have heard from people in the South Hills who say the noise is actually louder up there as it carries across. I've heard the train, the 31 years I've lived here, it does seem like it's more often and louder, which I heard is the case. So if we have support for it in other parts of town, I'm not so sure and I wouldn't know how one part would pay for it. I also do not like urban renewal funding, so I would like to find some other way to pay for it. And I share the concerns that if we put it in the road bond, that will not pass. And my last concern is that the surveys seem to be pretty much 50-50 on whether people want it or not. And I would prefer to have a majority want it before we spend the money. So to me, I'm not sure how to find that out, but if it's 50-50, I don't think it's enough. Thank you.
Okay, second round, Betty?
Yes, Claire reminded me of something else I wanted to say. I have a problem with the fencing. Why? That's to keep people from going on the tracks. Is that right?
That's correct.
I think they can. I think they could decide for themselves if they want to go on the tracks. I don't like fencing when it's not necessary, and I don't like spending money for it. What would pay for the fencing? City funds.
City funds, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The majority of the corridor is already fenced. It's just this would fill in the gaps.
I understand, but I don't see the reason to spend money for it. Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. And Betty, with regard to your previous comment, now that our meetings are broadcast on YouTube, I'm going to go and get the audio clip of you saying, I keep agreeing with Mike, and I'm going to keep that for posterity. Just so you know. I absolutely agree with Chris about the phasing. So my questions are, one, does the language in this motion around the safety measures alone preclude phasing?
No.
So if we vote for that, it's not at all in your mind that means it's all done at once?
That's correct.
Thank you. The second piece is, if we did the 3 intersections within the area of the URD, would that satisfy, on the east end 3 intersections, would that satisfy the federal housing issues around low-income housing and quiet zone?
My understanding is that it would. Okay.
Another reason for me to support the idea that he mentioned that allows for development in the riverfront area, and if the other party is going to hold us up for any reason in that process while we go through an appropriate community process for the other 7, then I would support separating those out. And the motion that I make will leave out the funding and will add the Pearl Street crossing.
Claire, you're up for second round.
Thanks. So I'll point out that the railroad is private property, and so that is part of the reason for the fencing, and that people have been killed because they've walked across the tracks and not realized the train was coming. So I do think there's an imperative to make the train zone as safe as possible. With all due respect for Councillor Taylor's insights into what voters will and will not support, I believe the road bond is the logical source for the additional funding. I think there's a real nexus with bike ped safety. I do actually think there's enough community support, and those who support this project will work to get more support from it. The Downtown Neighborhood Association has petitioned us to pass this quiet zone. The residents of Yapuya Terrace are desperately waiting for this to happen. The last formal vote that I know of from the Whitaker Community Council took place in 2007 when they came to the City Council and asked us to pursue this zone. And to Councillor Simple's comments, yes, the train horns went up in decibels and frequency after a change in regulations by the Railroad Administration in 2007. So they became louder and they were required to blow at every single intersection. And I think this amount of money will constitute a very small portion of the overall road bond. So I think that the risk it poses to passing the bond is minimal. As far as this conversation about those who live closest to it should pay for it as more than those who live farther away, I do not share that view. We fix roads all over the city that I will never drive on, and yet I pay for their repair and maintenance. I also pay for our schools, though I do not have any children in the school system. This is part of how we deal with our physical infrastructure in our city. This doesn't seem any different to me. And then as far as the nostalgia for the train horn, I really have a problem with that when people are being impacted on a daily basis by this noise pollution, which Councillor Clark pointed out. HUD has classified as noise pollution, which will make them disinclined to locate affordable housing next to the rail line. So comparing that impact to some nice feeling one gets from hearing the train blow, I really don't think can be compared. I really hope that we can go forward with the recommendation as presented by the panel. I think they did some very thoughtful work. The only thing I would change is adding that additional pedestrian safety crossing at Pearl. Otherwise, I support the recommendation of the panel as presented to us. One last item, as far as the concern from folks in Whitaker about rising property values, I think the MX is going to raise property values far more than a quiet zone will. And this council has started to look at how we can mitigate those kinds of impacts on our most vulnerable residents. And I think that's something we're committed to doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And Chris?
I think in terms of putting this into the street bond measure, I am also kind of nervous about doing that. I think one of the benefits of the street bond measure has been its singular focus and purpose. And I think to me, it would make me a little nervous to start putting other things in, as desirable as they may be in their own right. To me, one of the greatest advantages of the road bond is the fact that it is so specific and it is so targeted, and I wouldn't want to monkey with that. It ain't broke. I don't want to try to fix it. Also, with regard to the notion of breaking this into different parts, I wouldn't want to imply that one part would happen before another part or in preference to another part or is more important than another part. I hear the notion about not wanting to betray any promises or commitments made. I want to make sure those commitments represent an entire community, so that's why I would want to make sure that the entire community was comfortable with the community of Whitaker, whatever that area was comfortable and wanted to proceed. But if they do want to proceed and they do feel it's important, I think it should happen just as quickly as the other section. So I would be more maybe two parts, but those parts operate concurrently. They're both going at the same time. And I don't think that would necessarily be a problem because they involve two different funding mechanisms. We can pursue them as diligently as we want, both of them, but because they have a different geography and they have a different funding mechanism, they to me, are really not the same project. They're two parts of the same project, and they can be pursued independently, but at the same time. And we have an urban renewal district for the riverfront. It has money in it. Do you know how much money is in it right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just.
Just a ballpark.
Well, while they're looking, if I could clarify one thing that you said. So the recommendation from the panel wasn't it was to fund the west end with a general obligation bond. It wasn't specific to put it in the street bond. It could be its own bond measure.
But I was just commenting on what I'd heard around the table. So, yeah, that was not specific to what was in this motion. Just a general idea of what's in the
this is in the Riverfront Urban Renewal District we're talking about. There's a couple of things. There's cash available, right, and then there's a spending limit.
There's a spending limit.
There's roughly about $9 million available, but we've committed to purchase the EWEB properties for 5.75, yeah. So that gets reduced. And then the spending limit at last recall was we had about $28 million remaining, minus again what we've committed to spending on EWEB. So, it's in that neighborhood.
Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So conceivably, there's capacity within the Riverfront Urban Renewal District to raise money to finance this, and it would be all within the existing system that's there, whether it's in cash or whether it's in money capability.
We have the resources. It's eligible in the plan.
Right.
The two of the crossings aren't in the plan area. That's the only.
But with that modification, they would also be eligible.
Yes.
I mean, I believe if you have the district is in place, the money is there, it's intended for urban renewal, which to me this would include. I don't see why you wouldn't want to spend that money. I mean, philosophically, you may not like the idea of urban renewal districts, but the mechanism is there, and the money is there, and the need is there. So with that nexus, I would be comfortable using the money to do that. I think it would be entirely appropriate. So with all of that said, I would still, and I think we're not committing to a certain thing in this motion, so I'm still willing to support this motion. But I think with my interests stated within the context of this motion, there's still some additional things that could be pursued and covered. Thank you.
Emily?
Thank you. What percentage of the railroad quiet zone would be in the road bond? I don't know how big the road bond is, so is adding the railroad quiet zone going to be really noticeable?
Well, the previous bond was $43.9 million, and if you kept the same rate going forward in 2017, it'd be $51 million, and the west end of the quiet zone was 3.6, so 8%. It's an engineer at that end of it.
Well, not to make light of that much money, talking about millions is still astounding to me, but as that much of a percentage, I might lean a little bit more towards that it would pass. I can support cutting it in half, but only if they're both going forward. I have the utmost sympathy for Yapua, and yet I feel like the Whitaker, there has an awful lot of people living there right up to the tracks. So I would not vote for just the river's front side.
I just want to clarify the sequence and the time sensitivity. Can you, manager, sort of remind us of the schedule and the timing we're facing?
I think there's a couple things that will be helpful for us. One is safety measures across all 10 crossings. It would be good if the council could say yay or nay to that recommendation. We like the safety measures. The second piece is if the council can say, yes, we want to pursue, and what that means is the idea of extending the Riverfront Urban Renewal District by that 3/4 of an acre. You're not approving that now, but we'd go through the process, which is a public hearing and all. So that's a second piece to do that. Mm-hmm. Then the third piece is the funding of them. So, and you can choose what you want to do. What I've heard Mark say and others is that we do believe that we don't want to separate them in the sense of we pursue one and then just kind of the other one fades away and we never get to those other 7 crossings. I don't think that's the intent at all. if the council chooses to amend the urban renewal district boundary, our assumption would be is that we would be coming back in a future appropriation on a supplemental budget for the dollars to do that out of the riverfront, because you assume that that's how you're going to want to fund that. You're not making that decision today. That's moving forward. We would also want, if you don't choose a funding mechanism today on the other 7, we would also want to bring that back for your conversation on how do you want to move that forward. It could still be through a bond, connected or not connected to the road bond. It could be some other mechanism, but we would have an interest in bringing that back so you can make a decision on how you want to fund that going forward. And then I think how they actually get installed on the ground is sort of an engineering railroad cash flow kind of a question that, you know, somebody will have to figure out.
And I just have one thank you for that explanation. It was very helpful. And I have just one question, and it may just be that I didn't do enough homework on this, but the choice of the different kinds of crossing was both the combination of what would be safest and what was the most cost effective in that location, or?
Well, and what would feasibly work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for example, at Jefferson, there's a spur line that serves the grain miller, so that really limited the options we had at that particular crossing.
Okay. All right. It's really interesting work, actually, and it's really interesting to see the map. So I appreciate your work, and I really appreciate the committee that worked on this, because it's very, very interesting. Okay. So Mike, do you want to comment first before?
Yeah, just real quick.
Okay.
I just want, and the only reason I'm doing this is because somebody, and I can't remember who, mentioned that the quiet zone wouldn't have a massive increase on property values in the area, and I absolutely believe that it would. And so that's one of the reasons I mentioned the LID as an idea. And I didn't mean that the LID should be adjacency, physical adjacency. It could be a larger geography, whatever the law allows, and that's subject to a discussion. But as we've brought up about the housing that becomes possible, the federal affordable housing that becomes possible is often married with market rate housing in developments that are done in order to make them amenable to our regulation and our issues and needs here, and some of the financing mechanisms, as well as to make them appealing to banks in the complete financial package. So they're much more likely to get built when the quiet zone doesn't exist. And I think that makes a lot of the property that exists in Whitaker much more appealing from the standpoint of created housing in the future, especially multifamily housing. So I would suggest that property does become much more valuable once a quiet zone exists. I'm going to read the motion.
Actually, I just want to comment on that
Sure.
before we go to the motion. Because having heard this conversation, I just want to play that back, which is that to recall and support what Councilor Syrett said about this, we make infrastructure investments throughout this community, and we do it because the community functions better if we make those investments community-wide. And to put medians to prevent people from crossing a railroad track is not very different from doing any other road improvement on any other road in the community. And so that we do have a challenge before us as we make these improvements of not pricing people out of the market, and that's a fear, I think, in the Whitaker neighborhood and other neighborhoods as we make improvements. But we don't want to do the reverse, which is to do nothing and allow things to deteriorate and not take care of infrastructure needs that need to be met. So I just think we need to think community-wide how we invest in infrastructure so the community functions safely and well, and we all have an investment in being able to get across those tracks safely and still have the trains move through. So just out there, I think we should think bigger and broader when we look at these kind of decisions. Okay. Take it away.
And I agree, Mayor, when we get to my work session on islanded housing on unimproved roads, I'm going to look forward to saying the exact same thing. Trust me.
I look forward to that too.
Move to accept the safety measures for each of the 10 rail crossings from 8th and Hilliard to Van Buren with the addition of the Pearl Street pedestrian crossing, as recommended by the Railroad Quiet Zone Citizen Panel and outlined in the Railroad Quiet Zone and Safety Improvement Project Report.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So is Councillor Clark's addition of the Pearl Street crossing indicating we'd like to add those pedestrian safety features to that?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Question?
Yep.
Because you left out the funding strategy, that would not mean the city manager would not go ahead and schedule.
That's what I asked.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and proceed with that anyway.
Proceed with, I just want to make sure I understand.
He's going to have a separate
We'll schedule a work session for the agency board to review the minor amendments to the urban. That's still going to happen.
That's still going to happen. And then from our perspective, we still will want to come back and have the funding conversation. And again, if the council or the board, agency board proceeds with expanding the district, we will take that as, unless you say otherwise, a funding source comes with that. The rest of the 7 crossings, we will want to have a conversation on how you want to proceed with that.
Perfect. I just want to make sure.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Ready for a vote? All in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. Councilor Surratt?
I vote yes.
Okay, 5 in favor, none opposed. It passes. So thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you very much. Okay.
We'll talk about ambulances. Oh, no, that's something else. That's something
That's
else.
tonight.
Wrong meeting.
I think when you're ready.
All right, and when you're ready, our next topic, Vision Zero Action Plan.
Great. Hi. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Rob Interfeld, Transportation Planning Manager. I'm here with Matt Rodriguez, the city's traffic engineer, and we're here this afternoon to update you on the Vision Zero process, and in particular, the process of developing a Vision Zero action plan for the city. This is very timely because this week is actually United Nations Global Safety Week, which is focused on speed and what can be done to address this risk factor for traffic deaths and injuries. Do I have something to, oh, sorry, okay. Great, so first I'll just tell you what we're going to talk to you with you about. First, we're going to talk about the relationship between Vision Zero and the Transportation System Plan, give you an overview of Vision Zero, talk about the process for developing the action plan, look at some high crash maps of the city's most dangerous streets, give you examples of the draft actions that are being developed by the task force, talk about how we're engaging the public, and then talk about next steps. So as a reminder, Vision Zero means no loss of life or serious injuries on our transportation system is acceptable. And this is, so the Vision Zero and traffic safety are addressed extensively in the Transportation System Plan. This is the policy that most directly speaks to Vision Zero. So to consider safety first when making transportation decisions, striving for zero transportation-related fatalities and severe injuries. There are some of the other ways that Vision Zero is addressed in the TSP are through other policies, there's a lot of potential actions that go along with the policies, and also through specific capital projects that would make different streets in our community safer. This is an overview of the severe injuries and fatalities that we've had in Eugene over about a 10-year or 12-year period through 2014. The red is pedestrian, orange is bicycle riders, yellow is motorcycle riders, and the blue is people and vehicles. And so we average 6 fatal crashes per year, or actually it's 6 fatalities per year because you could have more than one person die in a fatal crash, and then 34 serious injuries per year. This is an overview of the process we've had so far. So you passed the resolution adopting that Vision Zero goal as a city policy in November of 2015. That winter, we became part of the national Vision Zero Emerging Cities program of the Vision Zero network. And then the following July, we received a grant of around $65,000 from ODOT. And we really needed that in order to be able to both staff this process and also hire a consultant firm, which is called the Tool Design Group, and they have a lot of experience working around the country and expertise that they're bringing to bear, and it's been great having them as a partner in this. Then the first task force meeting was last September. We had a community event at Camas Ridge Community School in October, and then the Technical Advisory Committee met in October for the first time. This is a snapshot of the different cities around the country that either have adopted Vision Zero or are considering it. I'm not sure if we showed you a map like this before, but one thing you would notice that's different is there's a lot more cities that are now engaged in Vision Zero now, and a lot more medium-sized cities than there had been before. It started off mostly as an approach that was adopted by larger cities in the country. So to help move forward with this, we have a task force, and the resolution you adopted specifically called for the creation of a task force. And then we also have a technical advisory committee that's made up of staff from different public agencies and some other organizations that are advising the task force. And you can see that, the frequency of which the different groups are meeting. This is a list of the people on the task force itself. Again, it's a mix of people from a bunch of different department heads from the city, people from different other public agencies like Lane Transit District, Oregon Department of Transportation, both of our school districts, and then some private sector representatives too, someone from the Wildish companies, AARP, and Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. This is the decision-making structure. So the task force the technical advisory committee is advising the task force. They will be recommending a Vision Zero action plan to the city manager, and then the city manager will be adopting that plan. And the plan is implementing the policy that you adopted when you adopted the Vision Zero resolution. So then the plan will be brought to the city council just for your acceptance. One thing I should say is that we're not the only entity in our area that's working on this. The Central Lane MPO recently adopted a safety plan that has similar goals. Also, Lane County is working on a safety plan that they haven't adopted yet that will also likely have similar goals. And the state adopted a transportation safety action plan that also calls for eliminating serious injuries and fatalities on our transportation system. So we're really all in alignment on this, and it's a good thing because it is a challenge to get there, but we have really good partners that we're working with. This gives you an overview of the process so far with the task force. They've had 4 meetings. Some of the things they've done is developing a vision statement, working with staff on developing a public involvement plan, and then reviewing where the crashes are happening and also the draft actions. And later, Matt will talk with you about where they're headed. This is the vision statement that the task force developed. Our community values the safety of all people who use our multimodal transportation system and will take equitable, data-driven actions to eliminate deaths and life-changing injuries by 2035. And now I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
Okay, Rob talked about the vision statement. That was one of the deliverables that will go into the action plan. Another is a series of maps that identify the high crash network for people driving, people walking, and people biking. Right now we have 3 separate maps. At a point in the future, there'll actually be a consolidated map as well. The driving map also includes motorcycles. What you'll see on here is really mostly this is the top 15 streets, top 15 most dangerous streets for people driving. There's 5 streets that occur on every map: 11th Avenue, 7th Avenue, River Road, Chambers Street, and Willamette Street. Typically what people find in their communities when they start looking at Vision Zero and where the fatalities and serious injuries are located, it's on your higher order streets, some minor arterials and major arterials. That's typically because not only are you trying to carry a large traffic volume, you're also it's also part of a community. There's people walking, there's people biking, so you're trying to do a lot of things in one space. This is the map for people walking. You'll see that it does change a little bit, but there are some streets that stay the same. And here's the map for people biking. So these are kind of high-level maps that we're using for to share with the community so that there's an awareness of what these streets are, also to use to communicate internally, but we do have much more detailed maps that also look at specific crash locations, intersections that are a concern in addition to the corridors. So for a successful Vision Zero action plan, there are a number of factors that are recommended as best practice. First, to have clear strategies and actions, to have owners of those strategies and actions. Interim targets is not always used. As Rob said, we're looking at 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2035. Sometimes people will say, let's get to this certain benchmark before that and focus on that as an interim goal. Timelines, we're kind of looking at a short, medium, and long term within the plan framework, and then performance measures to help, measure how we're doing and see if we need to make any adjustments within the plan. The structure that we have so far, we have 3 guiding tenets. That's to be data-driven, and that's really an underlying part of Vision Zero, is to use the data to prioritize where you're going to do your work. To be equitable, another important piece, we want to make sure that we're looking across the city at how our actions are affecting the communities, being aware of communities of concern and how we're serving them. And to be accountable, we also include transparency in this. So not only are we doing what we said we're going to do, but the community understands how we're moving forward with the plan. Causes of crashes, we've put that into 3 categories. First is street design. The reason that we're using that is that the majority of crashes are on the minority of streets in town. As I said, typically you're going to see most of those fatal and serious injury crashes on major arterials and minor arterials. So there's, the design of those streets is impacting the safety of them. Impairment, which is another, big factor in serious crashes, and dangerous behaviors, which can be speeding, failure to yield, things like that. So here are a few draft actions. We've got about 54 draft actions right now in the plan. We plan to look at that, consolidate them. 54 is probably a little bit too many, and we can nest some of them together. Just a few, I'll pick out. Street design, you can see target lower speed limits in high crash areas. I think as Rob mentioned, speed is a fundamental tenet of Vision Zero. If you're going 20, if you're driving a car 20 and you get in a crash with a pedestrian, there's a 1 in 10 chance they'll be killed or seriously injured. If someone's going 40, there's only a 2 in 10 chance that they will survive and not have a serious injury. So that difference of 20 miles an hour makes a big difference when you have a vulnerable user in a car interact. Let's see. Another one, dangerous behaviors, utilize automated enforcement cameras for red light and speed violations. Red light cameras are used throughout Oregon. I think it's about 12 or 13 cities that use them now with very good success and reduction of fatal crashes at intersections. We don't have the ability yet to have speed cameras without officers present. That's something that's being considered right now in the legislature. Under engagement and accountability, so you'll see that's kind of added to the 3 causes that we talked about before, and that really is kind of the catch-all for things that don't, really fit under the other 3 categories. So under engagement and accountability, examples provide pedestrian and bicycle safety education to all elementary and middle school students. Those programs exist now, but they're not reaching all the students that we have in school, so that's an opportunity. So public involvement, of course, we'll do public involvement at community events, Sunday streets, parties and parks, neighborhood association meetings. We've actually already had a number where we maybe haven't focused on the plan and the discussion, but we're talking about Vision Zero as part of those conversations with the communities. We also have a few communities we want to specifically try to reach out to and get more information and discuss with them how the plan might affect them as communities of color and the homeless community. We'll have an open house after the draft plan is released. We're looking to have a Vision Zero newsletter that will then be created to help keep people informed of what the city is doing and what the community is doing. And then the last one, traffic engineer presentation to community groups. I talked to a lot of different community groups, whether it's neighborhood associations or the Rotary City Club, and that's really a lot of what I'm talking about is safety. And that includes just the conversations and the phone calls we have from the community every day. One example might be an email, I think, that the council got today from Patrick Waters, who is a parent of a child that goes to Cesar Chavez. When there was a crash at 15th and Chambers a few weeks ago, just kind of outlining the importance of transportation safety and really working together to come up with solutions that work. So next steps, we have 3 more task force meetings planned. At the next meeting in June, we're really going to refine the actions and then talk about performance measures. We're looking to have a draft plan then done in July, and then complete the final plan in the fall. One of the reasons that we have the final plan getting completed in the fall is we want to have the ability to outreach to University of Oregon students as well when they come back. So that kind of replays it. But yeah, we're starting to move more actively into public involvement and then developing the final plan.
Thank you. That's a great report, and appreciate that. Betty, I have you first in the queue.
Oh, thank you.
See, you're learning.
I'm learning, yes. First, I want to say congratulations on the signs near Camas Ridge School. Finally, we have 20-mile speed limit there, and it's been years coming, and the light helps too. However, people are not obeying if they're coming. When I'm coming back from Mount Pisgah, I slow down and have a lot of really angry people behind me who finally, when they get a chance, they go around and honk loudly. But I think we could use more enforcement there, but it's really a lot better than it was. And I wondered if you're concentrating on downtown at all. I personally know people who themselves or their spouses or significant others have been hit downtown. And it's really, I think a part of the problem is the right turn on red. I know I've been honked at when I was walking at 10th and Oak, walking on the walk sign, and someone's there just honking, what are you doing in the street? And, but it's, I don't know if you considered the right, whether that's a state law or whether we could say no right turn on red.
Yeah, the city has the ability to sign no right turns on red. And in fact, Vision Zero is a product of Sweden, that brand of transportation safety. I mean, we've been working on transportation safety in Eugene in the United States for, decades, since cars first started being on the roads, as well as bicycles even. But that in Europe, typically there are no right turns on red. So they really have a different system of the way they control traffic. So we do have intersections where there are no right turns on red already. I think the thing we would just need to consider as part of that is that that would have a significant impact on flow of traffic. And obviously, that's part of the whole discussion of Vision Zero, is that you want your system to be as safe as it can be, but you also want it to function. So I don't want to say a balance, because it really is about priorities. But before we went up and said that all intersections have no right turn on red, we'd really need to think about the impacts of that.
Yeah, and is life more important than speed?
Yep.
And Councilor Chair, you may have noticed that the maps showing the pedestrian injuries and fatalities did have more of a concentration of streets downtown than for bicycling and driving crashes. So there is, the observations that you've heard from people, there's some validity
Sometimes
to that.
they aren't serious injuries, but it's serious to you if you have to go to the hospital and lose some time. I think the problem with right turn on red is that many people think that means you must turn instead of you may turn. Or they take it that way at least. Timing of walk signals, I wonder if you've thought about that. If people can't walk very fast, the walk sign doesn't last long enough to get all the way across the street.
So the walk, when there's a person walking, that really is the time to enter the crosswalk the time that we program into the signal once the hand comes up and starts flashing, and downtown when we have the countdown timer, that's actually the timing that's built in for someone to fully cross the street. So if you entered right at the end of the flashing walk person and the countdown started coming up,
Even if
you should
you
have enough time to cross the street. Now that, if someone especially has a mobility challenge that makes it, very hard for them to proceed across an intersection, it's feasible that may not be enough time. So in areas where we might have, assisted living or something like that, if we get feedback from the community, we can adjust those crossing times. We're also moving to a different traffic signal management system and some different traffic controller software that will let us do some different things with walk timing and potentially have longer walk times. Now, the length once it starts flashing should be the same or potentially specific to an intersection, but it'll be more dynamic.
Well, Hilliard Street at 30th is one place where you'd have to walk really fast to get all the way across, even if you start at the beginning.
Okay.
And I think there are other places too where it's difficult for people who can't run or walk fast. But I think speed limit is probably as you mentioned, is if we could reduce the speed to 20 miles an hour every place. I wouldn't like that when I'm trying to get somewhere, but there are places in Europe where it's 20 miles an hour all over, and that, as you mentioned, that is, if you do get hit, it's a lot safer at 20 miles an hour, and also it's easier to stop. Thank you.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I like, under the draft actions, I like all of the things that you're doing. One that is particularly important to me and has been for a while is the notion of cameras for red lights. Ever since my son was hit by a red light runner a number of years ago, I've been advocating for red lights. And for one reason or another, there's not enough accidents. It would be expensive to do. The police don't like it. I think under Vision Zero is the place where we could actually pursue that. And I look at the list of high crash driving streets, and I see West 11th, which I experienced myself, a lot of red light running on that street. In fact, I think Bailey Hill and West 11th is one of the highest red light running crash streets in the city. And so even if you want to do a pilot program, I think that would be a great place to start. I think there's a number of high crash intersections where you could start with red light cameras. I think the funding mechanism is definitely something we would want to figure out, but obviously other cities have figured it out, and I think we can as well. I think if you wanted to talk about speed cameras, that's a much more troubling one or difficult logistically, but one place you might pilot that or begin that is in school zones. Because I think that is one area where you do create a very significant issue for kids who might conceivably be hit. So if you don't want to launch a speed camera program all over town, you might look at speed cameras at least within school zones, because there is a real legitimate sensitivity there to kids getting hurt. So I think red light cameras, we should absolutely go with those. Perhaps a pilot program for speed cameras within school zones, at least to just kind of look at how that might work. I'm intrigued by the notion of, red turning right on a red or other kinds of things. I mean, jerky behavior is something that is not illegal. Being a jerk is not against the law. But oftentimes, being a jerk and acting in a dangerous manner are related. And so you can pick up a lot of jerks because they also tend to break the law and act dangerously at the same time. So I can make something illegal that's dangerous and catch a lot of jerks doing that. So I'm okay with that. I think that's perfectly fine. And we should look at ways to try to control that kind of dangerous and jerky behavior, not because it's jerky, but because it is dangerous. I don't want to do it just universally. I don't think making an entire city 20 miles an hour is the solution, because what it would do, it would just encourage more disobedient and jerky behavior. I mean, how many people do I see driving with cell phones up against their head? And that is against the law. But because the chance of me getting caught is almost non-existent, I break the law. I'm not saying I do, but I see a lot of people do that. I have hands free, so I'm pretty good at that. But anyway, the point is, I think there's a lot of things we can do that don't get too far into people's comfort level, but still can have a lot to do with controlling what are some of the most dangerous behaviors. And to me, red light running is right at the top of that list.
Can I get in the queue, Mayor?
Yes. Mike, you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor. The Vision Zero discussion's always interesting to me. I had, for years and years, I had an office at the corner of 6th and Olive. And I think that since then, the timing of those lights has been adjusted to make it safer. I believe, I'm not certain. But the timing of that particular intersection where the parking garage is on the corner in such a way that if someone is traveling north on Olive at a high rate of, let's say too high a rate of speed, they don't see the traffic that's coming on 6th. And while sitting there on that corner inside my office, I probably heard at least 1 to sometimes 3 T-bone crashes a year from people running that light and not quite making it. So I'm glad to hear us making a specific effort with this, but it leaves me with some questions along the lines of what Betty was saying. It sounds like a good deal of this is about speed. Yes? Slowing folks down, the right turn on red sort of thing.
Right turn on reds is not a specific item in the action plan.
Right.
It's something to consider. Red light cameras can also be used to enforce people that roll through lights when they turn right on red as well. But speed is an underlying tenet of Vision Zero, yes.
Of most all of what we're doing, so we're making tweaks in both the physical structure and other things in order to slow people down.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Help me understand that in the context of the upcoming TSP. Have we incorporated the action plan of Vision Zero in the TSP?
Well, could you go back to that slide? The TSP references the resolution that the council adopted.
Right.
I don't have all the policies and actions in the TSP memorized, but I think there's an action related. I think there's an action related to speed, or a potential action.
I'm speaking with specific focus around LOS. So if we're already asking that we want to normalize the level of congestion and service from D to E, are we saying then that in addition to that, we're going to slow things down quite a bit more on behalf of our work with Vision Zero?
So that you can't, speed and delay are related, but they're not the same thing.
Help the public.
So level of service speaks to how long you have to wait at a traffic light. That's what level of service is about. You can be moving down a street through a series of traffic lights at a lower speed, but still get through smoothly.
Maybe I can explain a little bit more what the typical framework is for speed in Vision Zero. So first of all, right now, the city has very limited ability to set its own speed limits. It's done through the state. So there are a few exceptions on local streets, but typically if we're going to try and change the speed limit on Coburg Road or the one that we changed on River Road, we have to say, hey, state, we think this speed should be reduced. We need to work with law enforcement to see what their recommendation is. We talk to the community to see if they're supportive. We talk about the issues that we're seeing and the reason that we think it's a good idea. Then they go out, they perform speed studies, they study it themselves, and they see if they back the proposal. If they measure speeds out on that street, something they call the 85th percentile, which means the speed that 85% of people are traveling, if that's within 10 miles an hour of your recommendation, either higher or lower, typically they'll say, yes, we'll change the speed. So we have kind of a limited framework to change speed right now. I just want to kind of put that out on the table. That is state law. For instance, in Washington, cities can change their own speed limits. That they have that power there. So when you look at Vision Zero, though, the framework is typically for cities to have a maximum speed limit of 30 on major streets and then work down from there. That's typically what's been put in place. So there would not likely be a proposal that would say all streets in town should be 20. That is not a typical proposal that has happened.
Maybe from 35 to 30?
But from 35 to 30.
So my question is, so what I assume I heard is slowing things down won't lead to greater congestion and traffic times. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, let me jump back in. So the other thing is that because of the safe distance that you have when you're following a car, that changes depending on speed. In traffic engineering parlance, the speed at which you can achieve the highest capacity on a roadway is 30 miles an hour. So if everyone was going 30, you'd actually have the most volume move on a street, and that's because of the distance between the cars as they travel. Does that make sense?
I think Mr. Frohnmeyer is right on that. We get driverless cars, they're this far apart, and then we'll have the maximum, optimum flow. I think that's awesome. Last thing with regard to bicycles, I noticed that all of the roads that were listed as most dangerous for bicycles are all in South Eugene. I'm wondering, do you do bicycle counts the way you do traffic auto counts on streets? On all streets?
The Central Lane MPO has a bicycle count program, and they generally have it do the counts on streets that are tend to have larger volume of bicycle riders, as well as shared use paths. And we're starting to install counters as part of our capital projects on shared use paths and maybe 1 or 2 street locations too.
Not most streets? You don't have bicycle counts on most streets?
But we have the ability to do bicycle counts. The other thing that I want to point out is that these, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong here, but these lists are based on the pure number of crashes, not on exposure. Right. So I think what we're seeing a little bit here is that the parts of town where people bike more, we'll have more bike crashes, even though the risk may be a little lower.
Where I was going with this was, yes, that's what I was going to point out. And that's why I was asking, because it's data driven. That's what I heard said. And your data collects based on the number. So I'm wondering, do you have data on the number of bicycle users per street? Because if there's a correction for safety you can make with regard to design, that may not be quite as data driven if you have one part of the community that tends to bike more often than another part of the community, and the issue is more design oriented than high incident.
I guess what I would say is we don't have that data in a comprehensive way that you're asking for. However, we are working all over the city on capital projects and on small, lighter, sort of quicker projects too. So the Vision Zero doesn't inform every single thing that we do as a city. So just an example is the intersection of Hunsaker and Irving is going to get a complete rebuild funded through ODOT, and we'll look at all modes when we look at how to make that intersection safer.
I have one more quick thing, but I ran out of time.
Yeah, so actually, and that's an appropriate thing, we need a little time check. We have 2 minutes left. I have 2 people left in the queue, and if you have more, can I have a motion to extend by 5 minutes?
By 10.
By 10, okay, 10 minutes. A second?
Second.
All in favor of extending by 10 minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, Claire?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to let you have another round.
Okay.
Emily's up.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. One concern I have is that most things seem to be directed at cars, which they're the most dangerous, but the other half of the equation is keeping people away from the cars. So I know it's part of our TSP, but I would really like to see more protected bike paths. I think it's really scary riding in traffic. So I don't ride my bike downtown, but I walk, and it's almost as dangerous. I don't know the solution for four-way stops, but it's a game of chicken downtown. And I would like to see no right turn on red on a few intersections where I have been almost hit. And that's scary too. And I need to still come downtown. I also think we should concentrate more on increasing public transit. If you get people on the buses, they're less likely to be hit by cars. So, everything comes down to money. I'd like to see more on public transit. I think that would make things safer. Another problem I have is at corners with stop signs. If there's bushes or trees, if you are not in exactly the right place, you cannot see cars or bikes coming. And you got to creep out and see whether or not you want to take the risk. So, some simple trimming. I don't want to take out the trees. The cell phones, I think that is one of the major causes of distraction, and that's going to require enforcement, which is time and money, but wow, that's really big.
By the way, there's a bill in the legislature that would give police the ability to, two bills, one of which passed the House by a lot, the ability to, right now, it's only illegal to text or be on the phone with a handheld device. You could be looking at a map or an app or the web or email, and that's legal. So they're going to basically expand it to anything you're doing on your phone would be illegal. And so police would have a lot more ability to pull people over, or more certainty when they're pulling someone over that what they're doing is illegal. So I think it'll aid efforts to have more enforcement of that.
That's fantastic.
And the other bill increases the fine that goes along with it.
Fantastic. That's exciting. And let's have more self-driving cars. That sounds like less accidents. And I've had a lot of requests for speed bumps. So, I think especially where there's kids on like Jefferson and stuff, that might be a less expensive way to do that. And those are all my ideas. Thank you for your work.
Great. Claire?
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate the work of the task force members and the technical advisory committee, and I really like the makeup of those groups of traffic engineers, public safety, school, safe routes to school folks, the hospital, Lane County. So I think we've really captured the important mix of people who need to be part of this discussion. I was wondering if in looking at this action plan, we've talked a couple of points, folks have brought up points where the legislature governs what we can do locally. Is there any support amongst the group to look at legislative proposals or lobbying at the legislature on certain items?
Yes. So we have actions related to trying to get legislation that allows the city to set its own speeds. We have an action around supporting legislative approval of using speed safety cameras as well. And I think distracted driving as well.
Great. I really appreciate Councilor Taylor bringing up the crosswalk timing. As someone who's not been able to be as fast walking as I used to be recently, I can appreciate the nervousness one has trying to cross a large intersection and watch that timer count down and drivers getting anxious for you to finish crossing. I really want to appreciate the traffic engineer's responsiveness to communities and certain neighborhoods asking for speed reductions throughout the city. I think that's been a very positive thing in the last year. I agree that slowing down is a major component, and sometimes that just means driving the speed limit. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to change the speed limits on our streets, but we need to get people to actually follow the speed limits, and that would result in them slowing down. I definitely support the idea of pursuing the red light cameras, and I like Councilor Pryor's idea of, if we are able to do that, piloting that at a couple of our worst intersections. 7th and the 105 off-ramp is notorious for red light runners there. And then lastly, I'll just mention something a little whimsical. I don't know if our traffic engineer or Rob saw John Oliver's presentation on traffic zebras. I think in Brazil, where they have folks dressed in costumes who dance in the street and get people to slow down and pay attention to pedestrians and traffics. It's a little goofy. It may not work for Eugene, but it seemed like a really effective public safety measure in that city. So thanks so much.
Rubbernecking for safety.
Traffic slugs. I think we got it.
Traffic slugs, yeah.
People might not notice it. They consider it normal.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I didn't see this, and it may well be included, and it may well be automatically the thing that's done, and I don't know, so I'm just throwing it because I thought about it. I throw it out there. The sake of continuity and predictability with regard to traffic devices, we've done a lot of new things in the future, in the last few years, that I think enhance safety. But I think one of the things that comes with new is difficulty for the general public to understand, for everyone to understand what they're seeing. I know a particular place right at the edge of my ward where I have trouble with it all the time, and it's on Oakway. And there are two new pedestrian, new within the last year and a half, probably, I guess, pedestrian crossings. One right near Oakway Center has both the crosswalk painted in the street. It has signage to say yield to pedestrians. It has has the median built in now, and the landing, and it also has blinking lights when someone presses the thing, I believe, or is within the crosswalk. About a quarter of a mile north, up towards Cal Young, there's another one. Only it doesn't have the signage and it doesn't have the lighting. And there are places where people can stand right on the edge, and I can't see them. I mean, depending on the light, depending on the time of day, depending on what happens, I have been coming down Oakway at the speed limit, not seen someone as they're stepping out into that crosswalk on the road, knowing that if they had been a few steps farther, I might not have seen them and may have hit them. So, and it's because that one of them has lights, the other one doesn't have lights, about how we notify people that there's pedestrians using that space. I'm arguing, I suppose, or suggesting the continuity of expectations for all crossings and for traffic devices that people might run into.
So one of the things we've done in the last year is come up with a guideline for marked crossings and how to make them safe depending on the conditions, how many lanes there are, how much traffic is on the street, what the speed limit is, or even what speed people are traveling if it's not the speed limit. And it gives us more consistency on how we make decisions about when we mark a crosswalk. So first of all, if we mark a crosswalk, and then how we mark it if we have flashers. On Oakway, what I would say is the reason why you would have a flasher closer to Coburg Road is because you have more lanes to cross, you have a higher volume of cars. That wasn't put in under the new guideline, but that's probably some reasoning that goes along with why that was thought to need flashers. As you go north on Oakway, it may be that marked crossing and signs meets that threshold, but other things that we will look at are street lighting to help people be seen, whether there's anything like trees or other things that are making it more difficult to see pedestrians. But we are working on developing more robust guidelines for how we mark and install crosswalks.
We'll double check the signage on Oakway, because you were saying you didn't see this.
There should be advanced signage, but we'll look at that.
Yeah, I like I said, I noticed that people don't know exactly what, I mean, they know that they're supposed to have right of way and be able to cross, but the cars don't always see them or stop because it doesn't seem reasonable in that space and marked in the manner it is.
One good thing on that street is there's a bike lane and there's a parking lane, and so it does create a little more room for margin of error, I guess I would say, than a street where you're stepping off the curb right into a travel lane.
So one of the things I'll mention really briefly, and it was an action up there, is we're trying to be a little bit more nimble as well. So if there are solutions that we can implement with temporary materials or solutions, we're trying to look at that versus waiting for the full meal deal, hundreds of thousands of dollars type improvement. So there might be some things like, for instance, on Oakway, where we could create temporary bump outs in the parking area to help people actually be in a different position before they enter the roadway and make it more visible too.
Betty?
Thank you. I've got 30 seconds, I think, maybe 60. I'm glad you're talking about asking the state to change the law. I don't know how we'll go about that, but they're restricting, there are many ways that the state restricts us from things we should be able to do, and speed limit is one of them. I wondered, a question is, have you asked neighborhood groups for ideas for making things more safe?
So we haven't done that across all neighborhood groups, but as I said, I've been speaking with quite a few of them. I'm meeting with 3 more neighborhood associations in the next month. We've been working pretty closely with Jefferson West Side on some safety improvements they want to do, and they got a neighborhood matching grant to look at some of those things too. So
there might be a lot of ideas that people would have. One that came from, I forget what community now, but in someplace they gave people, residents on residential streets, cameras to get the license numbers of people who were speeding. And then the city would send a picture of some of the children that lived on the street with their names. Like, say, Sally is best friends with Susie across the street. And sometimes they don't think before they cross the street. Send that to the person who was speeding down the street. And some things like that, seeing the person would really affect people. I know just hearing about it affected one person. I told it to. I said, well, what did you do about it? And he said, I don't drive down your street anymore. At that time, there were 15 little kids on my street there.
We do have a program similar to that called the Community Radar Watch program that's managed out of the police department. And we can talk about, I mean, it's sort of an escalating thing depending on how many times the volunteers see someone speeding with a radar gun with ultimately, like, I think, a letter from the chief. But we can certainly talk with them about that idea. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Putting a child name on it and a picture makes a difference. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are out of time, but this was a great conversation. Really appreciate your work on this and your leadership, and we look forward to more. So thank you. With that, we'll close the meeting.